blue raise hand on the bottom right.
No, but I didn't have access to it at that moment.
Oh, why, I wonder?
You should have access at all times.
Everyone for a moment. And just mention that we are being recorded and being broadcast live stream. And this is for real. I'm going to unmute you, Glenn.
Thank you.
And, would you like me to take roll call?
Yes, let's start with a roll call, Sarah, please.
Okay, so this means I unmute everyone. Staff, you can just remute yourselves. That'd be great.
You're right.
All right, Judy Kirovsky.
Maybe I should do that.
Present.
Glenn Craig.
Here.
Alice O'Connor.
Here.
Jim Ring.
Here.
Mike Revere.
Here.
Perfect. We have quorum. I'm going to mute everyone again. And unmute you, Glenn. You can take it away.
Okay. First item we cover is public comment. We have.
I forgot, Glenn.
Uh-oh, is that you again?
We have to ask Paul to do his thing.
Okay, Paul, let's do your your administrative task here.
Unmute myself before I share the screen. All right, welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. To members and city staff, the chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to speak or ask a question. Voting will be considered unanimous. Click raise hand to object or request a roll call. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link in your original email. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Thank you, and Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, public comment. Speaking limit of 3 minutes. Do we have anyone registered for public comment, please?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Disclosures and recusals for the panel. I guess I'll start with myself, just being a member of the disclosing a membership of the Room Tax Commission for Madison. Anyone else? Looks like Alice has got a hand.
Go ahead, Alice.
Monona Terrace Booking Advisory Committee.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
We look good.
Okay, fantastic. Approval of the minutes.
Raise your
did have-
hand.
We did have a meeting in February between the last board meeting and the upcoming board meeting, but we did not have a board meeting, full board meeting. So, any motion to approve the minutes?
Please raise your hand. I see Jim Ring, unmute. Jim, make your motion.
Move for minutes.
Okay,
Second? I think I saw Alice.
Alice. Alice, you can second it, please.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on the matter? Minutes? All in favor?
Oh, hold a moment.
Oh.
Looks like Elder Revere has something to say.
Okay, Mr. Revere?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I can be recognized after this vote.
Okay,
Okay. Vote on to approve the minutes from the February meeting. All in favor?
if you're not in favor, raise your hand.
If you're not in favor, raise your hand, and then we'll have a fantastic.
You look good.
It approved. Minutes are approved. Okay, Mr.
Now,
Revere. Yeah.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm sorry I didn't raise my hand quick enough to add my regular disclosure, and so ditto the disclosures that Glenn and Alice already made. I serve on both of those bodies, both of those committees.
Okay.
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Noted. Okay. We'll go right to the new business items. We really appreciate having Dave Schmidtke, the City of Madison Finance Director, with us today. He's in high demand right now with everything that's going on in the city budgeting process, and specifically the Monona Terrace budgeting process and forecasting that we're in the middle of right now. So, Dave, we don't have a super long meeting time, but you have a fantastic presentation you sent to us in advance. I think there's a lot of more global economic issues in there that you can go over. I think the board or the committee is primarily interested in the impact on of the city budget on Monona Terrace because that's our body. But we certainly want to find out more about the funding of Monona Terrace and the forecasting that you've been doing, as well as the overall room tax commission or the room tax allocation for forecast that you have in other subsidies and operations of Monona Terrace from your perspective. So I think what we'll do is probably just turn this over to Dave. I don't see any questions, and does that sound good to you, Dave?
It does. Thanks, Glenn. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. I wish it was under better circumstances, but it certainly is a challenge we're facing in our community, state, country, and world, and a lot of difficulties in front of us. As Glenn said, I have a number of slides on the economy. I will move through those very quickly and get to, I think, the matters you're most interested in. I will share my screen. And can everyone see that? Great. We will move through this first part quickly, and many of you have probably been watching this. We're at historic unemployment levels. And again, if you've been reading the media, the news accounts, officially we're a little under 15% from what was released by the Department of Labor, but that number is probably closer to 23%. There was some incorrect classification of workers being absent rather than laid off, and there has been a historic drop in labor force participation. Putting those together, we're probably closer to 23% in unemployment rate in April, and the Great Depression unemployment rate reached 25%. So we are approaching really unprecedented levels of unemployment and job loss, with 30 million people having lost their jobs when we're approaching 20% of the workforce. Again, you've probably seen charts like this. Weekly claims are off the chart, even in the perspective of the Great Recession. We have seen that level off over the last couple of weeks, as we probably have hit a peak at the moment for job losses. About 30 million jobs lost. That wipes out all the jobs created over the last roughly 10 years, which had offset jobs lost during the Great Recession. So again, the economic dislocation and pain is significant. This just shows the rate of job growth since last summer, where we were seeing about 1 to 2% on a year-over-year basis of job growth, and with that monthly change, and then of course with the closing of the economy due to stay-at-home orders throughout the country to try to stem the tide of the pandemic, significant and unprecedented job losses over the last 7, 8, 9 weeks. I said the unemployment rate, unprecedented levels in the post-war period. That last highest peak in the early 80s with that severe recession, and the high in the Great Recession as well, with the other peak in the immediate post-war period as the country was shifting from a wartime footing to peacetime economic approaches. We've lost 20 million jobs in April. This data is from ADP, does a survey right in advance of the Labor Department release. So we've really lost all the jobs in the last almost 20 years. This is the goods producing sector, which was already low given decisions in sending those types of jobs outside of the country. Service sector, which had seen growth, again, has fallen to roughly the level seen during the Great Recession. There's a broad-based reductions in jobs, including, not to be, no surprise, in the leisure and hospitality area, which is heavily impacted by the inability to be in groups or travel. Construction's been hit, other services as well. Healthcare, which seems to be surprising, but is not, as all elective surgeries and other types of activities stopped in that area. Professional services and management of companies has not yet seen an effect, probably will see in the future. Also broad-based across the size of business. Small businesses, particularly hard hit, but even larger companies have seen reductions, percentage reductions in their businesses. So the survey from the Society of Human Resources Management, and over half of small businesses could be out of business in 6 months, and over half of laid off employees, another 22% of furloughed employees. Nearly 2/3 that report a decrease in revenue, and those decreases are significant, and for some are total. In Wisconsin, these are some projections from a UW-Madison think tank, and they are estimating the Wisconsin employment rate. Now, this was 2 weeks ago at 20%, probably higher than that, and you can see how that compares to the last peak during the Great Recession. So again, these are unprecedented numbers. Again, Wisconsin seeing unemployment claims well above historic levels. A little bit of a blurry picture, but this again is from that UW think tank. The impact on unemployment is not evenly distributed around the state. Dane County probably sees one of the lower rates of change in unemployment. Some of the other counties around the state that are a little more sensitive to tourism activity and other impacts have seen a much proportionally greater increase in their unemployment rate. As you may know, under the Federal CARES Act, which was a large $2 trillion stimulus passed a few weeks ago by Congress, there's a $600 a week add-on. And when you add that to the base unemployment compensation levels in Wisconsin, expected to replace about 110% of the average weekly wages. So some significant income support. There's been a lot of swift action by both the Federal Reserve on monetary policy and Congress on fiscal policy in the immediate wake of the impact of the response to the pandemic. Gives a sense of how those jobs across the country. Now this is from sort of late April, so probably 3 weeks ago. And the proportion of the total job market in a state to the unemployment claims that they're seeing. Some areas that are, have businesses that might be more manufacturing related or leisure and hospitality in the case of Nevada, and other places are seeing a much greater impact than perhaps other parts of the country. These are just some quick slides on what's happening nationally. Again, this is a broad-based impact with durable goods orders falling. Consumer sentiment has dropped the fastest rate since this data has been reported. Home sales are falling off, both existing and new homes. And this data will probably continue to be bad in the months ahead. No surprise, the airline industry and airline traffic has been hit dramatically. And you can see that it tracks directly with the closure and the implementation of stay-at-home orders. Just unprecedented drops. And just to give you a sense of what's happening here in Madison, typically they see 2,000 passengers a day. On a recent day, they saw 60 passengers. So there are half the airline fleet has been grounded around the country, and those planes that are still flying have very few passengers on them. Again, this is just a little more snapshots on Wisconsin's unemployment, which I already covered. This is just what's happening in Dane County on unemployment claims. The left graph is just the initial claims. So those are the first time applications. Again, that pace has slowed quite a bit again, but again, just hugely elevated compared to the past. And then these are the ongoing, continuing claims, and that number has, again, a very dramatic increase. This just shows Dane County relative to Milwaukee County and the rest of the state. So the sort of bottom line is Dane County. This is the proportion of weekly claims to the population of the county or state. The sort of reddish line that I'm pointing at here, that's Milwaukee County, and this is the state, kind of leveled off like Dane County has. This again is some data that's focused on Wisconsin. A Mad Rep UW Oshkosh WADC survey. Now this again is a few weeks old. 1/3 of Wisconsin businesses will close permanently if the stay-at-home order lasts 3 months. Clearly, we're moving out of safer at home into some unknown world, but the impact's going to be broad-based, and the jobs that are temporarily lost at the moment could become permanently lost. This is sales growth. Again, restaurants obviously heavily impacted, travel, but there has been spikes clearly in sales activity at groceries, kind of matching up with that immediate response with the closure and everybody trampling into grocery stores to stock up. and then not doing much since then. Again, more data just showing retail, information, healthcare, and accommodation, food. So again, broad-based drop-off. Hotel visits, no surprise, dropped off, and grocery stores. And then this is just airport foot traffic in this lower right-hand corner. Again, broad-based, and airports around the state seeing that effect. You're probably very familiar with this, but this is what's happening with Monona Terrace events. With nothing in April, very few in May and June, and again, as Connie and others can speak to much more eloquently than I can. It's hard to know what will happen in June and after with events and the continuing public health requirements associated with groups and group activities. Just with the city, again, with the economic dislocation, we've seen our investment portfolio earning potential drop. And that's just tied to what's happening with treasuries and the bond market generally. Again, this is about 3 weeks old. This is the Congressional Budget Office and their latest forecast. 12% decline in gross domestic product in the second quarter. And that's an annualized rate of 40%. They're predicting an annual drop in 2020 in gross domestic product of about 6% and a return to growth in 2021. And that does, and you can see the unemployment rate, which pretty much at that 14%, but it's probably going to be higher than that. Throughout the year, though, it'll be an 11% unemployment rate, and it'll still stay very elevated through 2021. Their assumptions are that social distancing continues into the early summer, and there will be later outbreaks of the virus that could result in some partial or complete shutdowns of the economy. And the 10-year Treasury note interest rate is expected to be 0.6%. That'll remain depressed probably through this year and next and into 2022. This is just a quick snapshot. We gave a briefing on Tuesday evening to the City Finance Committee on both the outlook in this current year, 2020, for the city's general and other funds, as well as the budget outlook for 2021 next year. So the general fund and library funds are predicting a $12 million deficit in revenues and expenditures. That's heavily driven by room taxes and other revenue sources that are sensitive to economic activity. And then on the other funds, this just identifies areas such as the room tax fund, the water utility, Monona Terrace, the parking utility, Metro, all places that, again, are sensitive to economic activity and the lack of that in these last, basically in this quarter. And that's a prediction of about almost a $19 million deficit. General fund revenue, this just is a reminder that most of the city's general fund comes from property taxes, state aid, and then our local revenues are charges for services such as building permits, ambulance conveyance fees, and so on. We're predicting pretty significant reductions in things such as parking violations, traffic violations, room tax reduction of 50%, drop in interest revenue, and ambulance conveyance fees and other licenses and permits. And then just a quick snapshot on our COVID costs, which have been a little over $3 million through early May. Much of that is permanent staff that have been assigned to emergency response activities that probably will not be reimbursable by any sort of federal programs, including federal dollars, but those really are already budgeted, and we're just sort of spending that time on that activity rather than other activities. And our major expenditures outside of personnel have been central respite hotel, supplies purchasing for PPE, medical supplies, and then some, telework tools and disinfectant equipment and things like that. The mayor also announced administrative actions in the last few days that will be followed up with continuing announcements on other actions to try to reduce spending, including a hiring freeze, limits on seasonal and hourly staffing, and limits on non-essential supplies and purchase services spending, requiring mayor's office approval to fill any sort of essential positions and any management and service contract or consulting contract. Balancing this year will really be focused on those hiring freezes, probably dipping into the general fund balance, which is healthy. We had a good year in 2019, finished under budget on expenditures, and revenues beat projections. But use of the fund balance requires that we have plans to put that back in place. We also have a significant amount of funding from the CARES Act for the city's transit utility, and that would help to both address their own source revenue loss, fare box reductions, and things like that due to the drop in ridership and basically the elimination of fees fares during this time, and also some consideration of using those funds to replace city general fund subsidy to help with issues in the city's general fund from the economic impact of the pandemic. City is also looking at furloughs. No decisions have been made on that yet. We spend about $800,000 a day, all funds, all positions, to pay city staff for their work. And a 4 to 6 day furlough or 5 to 7 day furlough program saves between $4 and $5 million, and looking at options to have sort of a progressive approach on that, so it doesn't impact lower paid workers as much as higher paid workers. Also investigating implementation of what's called a work share program that's run by the State Department of Workforce Development, and maybe focused on areas of the city that have little to no work right now, such as Monona Terrace, parking utility, and the library. Under the CARES Act, this program, which would typically the employer would have to pay for the unemployment, is fully funded by the federal government through this year. Plus, individuals who are affected by it can claim unemployment and also be eligible for the $600 weekly add-on, which is available through the end of July. Hours must be reduced between 10 and 60% of normal hours, and it must be done in lieu of layoffs, and a plan needs to be approved, submitted to DWD and approved. So the city is looking at that for those units. Switching to the room tax and some predictions on what's going to happen. This is from HVS Consulting, which I know Connie and her team have been talking with these folks as well. These are their predictions for the top markets of that get room tax around the country: New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, so on, at Las Vegas. And they are predicting, under a best case scenario, a 52% reduction in room tax revenues from the baseline, and a 60% of the worst case, with under neither option or scenario would revenues return to the base case growth rate until 2025, and that's under the best case scenario. So we've used these as well as some information in the early days of the economic impacts from the pandemic to inform these preliminary projections on room tax forecasts this year and beyond. And that's what this slide is. This gives you historic room tax revenues over the past almost 30 years. And so the bars show the total amount collected, and the line that you see there is the growth rate year over year, and just highlighted where recessions occurred and what happened to the room tax with the Great Recession here in the middle, and then this predicted impact from the COVID-19 economic damage, showing about a 50% drop in revenues and what that means compared to the prior year. And as you can see, that would drop room tax revenues below roughly to where things were at almost 10 years ago. This is just the next few slides are just a quick background on the room tax revenues in the current budget, the adopted budget. Under state law, the city can assume about a maximum of 30% of room tax revenues for its general fund activities, and at least 70% needs to go to a room tax commission for allocation for tourism related tourism marketing activities. And you can see the split of the roughly a little more than $19 million of expected revenues before the pandemic arrived. Those dollars under the room tax commission, so that 70% is allocated in the ways you see here, primarily to a Monona Terrace subsidy, and then contractual relationship with Destination Madison for their marketing activities, primarily in support of Monona Terrace. And Overture also gets a subsidy, which represents 15% of that share. The Henry Violet Zoo and Albrecht Gardens receive about 5% of those shares. The city receives some funding to help support things like Dane Dances, Make Music Madison, and some city art-related activities, and a small amount for administration of the room tax. Within Monona Terrace's share of the subsidy, you can see the operations amount is about $4.3 million. Capital share, $870,000, and then there's a little under $300,000 for debt service. It's about $272,000 of that is really the last debt service payment for the original revenue bond issued to finance the construction of Monona Terrace, and then there's some small amounts for borrowing for capital projects that occurred during the most recent renovation. These are Monona Terrace reserves since 2009, and again, the goal is to be at 20% of revenues, and that has been the case over the years. We have made some recalibration of the numbers for the last roughly 3-4 years, as we took a closer look at how we were treating some of the capital expenditures, which could not be capitalized, and so they were treated as operating expenditures. But in this calculation of the surplus, the corresponding room tax revenue had not moved with it. So it appeared that the reserves were falling, but actually there are more reserves there than we had sort of calculated through this methodology in the past. And I'll show that on the next slide. A few things that are going on in that reserve calculation and in Monona Terrace's overall financial condition. First of all, there's a GASB requirement, GASB 68, regarding the treatment of pension expenses, and any sort of change in the overall asset level of the WRS, the Wisconsin Retirement System, is allocated to all of the participants. So the city gets an allocation, and then under accounting rules for the enterprises, such as Monona Terrace, that is sort of expense to their financial statement, in effect, increase in their liability. That's what these sort of positive numbers are. And so you can see that that has an impact on Monona Terrace operating expenses. So what's been expensed to that? It's not a cash hit, but it is a impact on fund balance. The graph just below that is what I was referencing on capital projects. As we move to our new Munis financial system and implemented more clearer rules on how we were looking at capital and treating it from a perspective of could it be capitalized or does it need to be expensed as operating, particularly, well, primarily in the enterprise units such as Monona Terrace. These costs that you see in 17, 18, and 19 became operating costs, but in the calculation of the reserves, which is a methodology that's been in place since the late 90s, there was not a corresponding adjustment made for the revenues from the room tax that should go behind this. So this was tending to draw down when we sort of showed what the reserves were, what the reserve amount was. So we have made an adjustment to add those back into the calculation. And then moving to the upper right quadrant, we also reserve in the room tax fund any appropriations to Monona Terrace for capital projects that have gone unspent in prior years. And that number has been growing over the last few years, and it's almost $1 million in 2019. So this is a revenue reservation in the room tax fund with the expectation that Monona Terrace will eventually spend down these amounts. And this is something that Connie and her team are looking at, the extent to which these projects could be closed and these projects will actually occur, and the extent to which that might help with the overall room tax subsidy reduction. Finally, just to give you a sense of cash balance versus reserves, cash is not necessarily reserves, but Monona Terrace's cash balance, so this would be at the end of each of these years, has been in the sort of $3.2 to $3.8 million area. That shows there's significant liquidity. I think it backs up that reserve number and does give a sense of there is a little bit of capability of weathering a portion of this storm. This is what we'll focus on the most in terms of trying to keep Monona Terrace balanced and the extent to which that there might be sort of impacts on the general fund. It's at the point that there is insufficient cash that the general fund has to step in. We've seen that on a much smaller scale, for example, in the Gulf enterprise. You may have read about that, where the general fund actually through 2019 has had to, in effect, lend about $1.4 million of cash to the Gulf enterprise due to basically costs exceeding revenues. And again, as you may know, they have been, there's a Gulf task force looking at how to address that sort of systemic issue in the operation of the golf courses. So that's a very quick run through of all this information. I will stop sharing my screen here and I'll turn it back over to you, Glenn, and see how you would like to proceed.
Thanks, Dave. That was quite a bit of information. None of it particularly good news. I do appreciate the analysis of the reserve and some of the funding mechanics. And I will have a couple of questions, but I'd like to let the committee have some questions. I know we, and Connie as well, probably have some questions of you, Dave, on your presentation.
Please raise your hand if you have a question. Oh. Alice, you're unmuted.
A question I have, in looking at the pie chart where the split on the room tax is 39% and 39%. And then, with an expectation that the room tax will drop about, I think you said 50%. How are you going to, going forward? Because the city also takes kind of a chunk for its admin, and that seems to be a little bit of a roving number. How do you envision that? Because I think Connie will have to make, I mean, we're all gonna have to make some pretty tough decisions here. If, it's down that much, and I think it's going to be, will that be an even allocation? Are you just gonna, or is there gonna be a different look at, um, how that pie gets allocated?
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult situation. These decisions are made by the Room Tax Commission in terms of how those dollars are allocated. The Room Tax Commission is meeting on May 29th, and it will probably get a presentation like what you've just seen here, and it will have to come up with an approach to bring their projected expenditures in line with projected revenues. So, I mean, one sort of very basic option that they could take, for example, would be to reduce all of the spending that they had allocated originally by 50%, so that it is in line with the projected revenues from the room tax. I know that Monona Terrace, Connie and her team, that's the assumptions they've been using in sort of building their projections. That's the assumption that we use for the general fund impact, a 50% reduction in that 30% share. But ultimately, the Room Tax Commission makes that decision on that pie that you're referencing.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Judy. Oops, just a second. Go ahead, Judy. Oh. Wait a minute, Judy.
We clicked unmute, so you probably have a prompt on your screen that you need to click to confirm that you'd like to be unmuted.
I do. Okay, so my question is about that pie chart and that allocation and that assumption of the 50% reduction, and that 50% reduction estimate assumption was built on a normal first 3 months of the year, right? January, February, part of March. So we really don't know how close it'll be to 50% because it's an annual figure. Am I right about that?
So the 50% is a forecast for the entire year.
Based
on, I showed you some of those graphs. HVS Consulting took a look at what they think is going to happen in some of their modeling. We've had some conversations with Destination Madison that tends to confirm that. And really the expectation is that in this second quarter, there will be almost no room tax activity. And that there would be a return to some form of normal in the third quarter, but still depressed through the rest of the year. And that's how we arrive at the 50% estimate for the entire year.
And so you just answered my follow-up questions, which were going to be how is the third quarter treated, and then how is the fourth quarter being treated in these projections? And no crystal ball. I was just curious how it was being put together. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim Ring has a question. I'm going to unmute him. Jim, are you getting a prompt?
Sorry about that. Okay, Dave, I was looking at the question about the reserve fund. I was asking Connie back in April about where we were at, and she forwarded an email you had sent to her explaining what our reserve balance was, and that email was $491,000. $900,000 drop due to OPT liabilities and increased revenues. And I'm trying to reconcile that with the chart that appears to show almost a 1.8, 1.9 million reserve balance.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I sent that email, that was the number that we had based on our methodology. And since that time, we've taken a closer look at it. And those were those sort of some of those last four charts I showed you. We identified that some capital costs that are in the capital budget for Monona Terrace, but could not be capitalized, were expensed to operating, but we hadn't made a corresponding adjustment to move the room tax subsidy along with that. So it just sort of drew down the reserves where it shouldn't have. So that's one chunk of that difference between the 500,000 and the 1.9 million. And actually that I think is all of it over that amount of time.
So this chart is updating what was in that April email.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I also have a question, if you don't mind, on cash balances. I guess my understanding was that anytime we had a surplus in a year, it was added to the reserve. And now I see we have also, is that 3.5 million in addition to the 1.9 million reserve?
No.
Where did it?
No, so that's just your cash at the end of the year. You know, it doesn't take into effect any sort of non-cash adjustments. The reserve is sort of a methodology that's been in, you know, sort of in place for many years, and just tries to look at kind of the Monona Terrace operating expenditures and its revenues and any sort of expenses. So it doesn't take into account any sort of changes that might have occurred to asset liabilities, like depreciation and things like that. So the cash is just the cash without any sort of other offsetting entries. The reserves are going to be, you know, lower than that, just based on other impacts on assets and liabilities that translate into that calculation. But it does show, I think, that Monona Terrace has, you know, pretty good liquidity at the end of the year, and you know, reserves are, you know, once we made this recalibration, are actually above the 20% target, which I think is good news. And some of this is just responding to, you know, there's been a number of accounting treatment changes over the last few years that translated into the GASB 68 pension expensing, as well as the how we've been treating what's in the capital budget as what we budget as a capital expenditure, but actually from an accounting perspective can't be capitalized, and so it gets expensed to operating. And so once we went back and spent a little more time on that, we were able to true up the reserves closer to what they should be, and then that, I think that's ground truthed out by where the cash balances are.
Okay. Maybe just give me what is the cash we have available to cover the losses that were losses for
I would say it's the 1.9. The cash balance is, you know, it's probably not going to take into account immediate expenditures that might be occurring right away in January. It's sort of a point in time snapshot where the reserves are a little more realistic in terms of what's actually there. Now, I will say that the GASB 68 pension expense does not affect your cash. So that really is sort of a fund balance impact, and we are reflecting that as an expense in the reserve calculation. So that does account for some of that difference between cash and reserves. But again, that's an accounting treatment requirement that we need to show. But that is a good example of probably the largest area of, where there's probably a little more cash flexibility compared to that reserve calculation.
Jim, does
Thank
that
you.
satisfy you?
Yes.
Any other questions?
And you're the
Yep,
you're the
thank you.
chair. You can unmute yourself.
Oh, not sure. But anyway, we have 10 minutes left before the next meeting starts. I had a couple questions for Dave. I can save them. Connie, did you want to do a presentation of the forecast, or do you want to do that at the board meeting, or what do you prefer? We'll have to unmute Connie. Can you unmute Connie, please? There she goes.
I'm unmuted. So if you have some questions, other staff members have some questions, or other board members, I think we have Dave for a limited time, and we should ask those questions. I can give this at the regular meeting.
Okay. I have a quick question for Dave, if I could. It's following along Jim's lines, because the reserve is definitely differently calculated differently than I recall in the past as well. You had said the unspent capital appropriations was part of the room tax fund. Did you mean the reserve fund for Monona Terrace?
No. So this is separate from that. How we've treated actual capital expenditures, two different things. Each year, Monona Terrace has capital appropriations in the budget, and those are funded from the room tax. If those appropriations aren't spent, we reserve those in the room tax fund condition, and sometimes that's just the case where Monona Terrace might be in the middle of a project. It might cross a fiscal year. It might also be the case that the project is complete, but it did not spend all of its appropriated amount, original appropriation, and those projects have not yet been closed. And so what we do is, in anticipation of the potential of spending on those capital projects, we reserve those unspent appropriation amounts. In fact, it's a revenue reserve. And as of the end of 2019, that was about $983,000 of sort of unspent appropriation authority for which revenues had been reserved. So it jumped quite a bit between 2018 and 2019. And I know that Connie and her team are looking at that to see what's actually going on there, and can some of those projects be closed? To what extent are those projects still in process? And how does that interact with their projects that are budgeted in 2020 and so on?
Okay, so we'll see that in the room tax commission's fund condition report.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any more questions? Glenn, do you want to ask for adjournment?
Yes, we're really getting close to the board meeting, so we really appreciate Dave's time today. It's extremely valuable. I wish we could have you at every meeting, but I think you're probably meetinged out. I would like to entertain a motion for adjournment, please. Alice?
Go ahead.
Alice moves seconds. Alder Verveer, second.
Go ahead.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Or all opposed, raise your hand. There we go. Thank you all today. We'll see you shortly, those coming to the board meeting.
We're adjourned from the first meeting, and we are going to be starting the second.
All right, Glenn, you're going back to
Going
just
back
a
to
regular
the-
panelist. So now
back
you
to the
should see raise hand at the bottom. Alice has been promoted to co-host, but left.
Order, Alice?
Yes, we're going to call the order, the Monona Terrace Board meeting on Thursday, May 14th, 2020. Staff will please mute yourselves as we will be unmuting everyone for Sarah to take the roll call. Sarah?
Okay. Sharon Corrigan. Here. Skip Harless.
Here.
Judy Karofsky.
Present.
Glenn Craig.
Here.
Alice O'Connor.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Jane Richardson.
Here.
Mark Richardson. Jim Ring.
Here.
Eric Rotier.
Here.
Mike Revere.
Here.
And Aureliano Montes.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okie dokie. Well, now you're all going to be muted again, and we're our tech facilitator to read the pre-meeting instructions. Paul?
Thanks. Welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. To members and city staff, the chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to speak or ask questions. Voting will be considered unanimous. Click raise hand to object or request a roll call. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link in your original email. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Thank you. Chair, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. So we need a motion to approve the minutes from January 16th.
Please raise your hands.
To raise my hand.
Go ahead, Judy.
So moved.
Then we need a second.
I'm going to unmute Jim, or no, Alder Revere.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Raise your hands. Is that okay, Sarah?
No, if they disagree or
If you disagree and don't like the minutes as they were presented, raise your hand. I don't see anybody. Okay, minutes approved. So let's see here now.
public comment.
Public comment.
We have Wendy and Patty here, but they have agenda.
Okay. Now we go move on to any disclosures or recusals. I'm on the Monona Terrace Booking Advisory Committee. Anybody else have any?
Unmute Glenn.
I'm on the City of Madison Room Tax Commission.
I'm going to unmute Alder Revere.
Thank you. I am a member of each of those bodies previously mentioned.
Okay. Looks good. Introductions?
Okay, sorry, this is my place here. Well, this is kind of exciting. We have some new board members that are familiar to some of us because they have a lot of different roles that they've played in our city. So welcome to Sharon Corrigan, who has been the executive director, the interim executive director of the Alliant Energy Center until the end of this week. And she, prior to this appointment, had served on the Dane County Board of Supervisors for 10 years, the last 6 as the chair of the board. She, while serving on the county board, she had led the county's work evaluating economic potential for the Alliant Energy Center, master planning for the center's future, and most recently, chairing the Alliant Energy Center Redevelopment Committee. She's also served on the board of the Greater Madison Convention and Visitors Bureau for 4 years and she currently lives in Middleton, where she and her husband, Dan Burkhalter, have 4 children and 4 grandchildren. So welcome, Sharon. I don't see you. Oh, there you are. There you are over on the left. Welcome. Brent Kaiser McHenry, we certainly welcome you to your new and exciting role. He was appointed by County Executive Joe Parisi, or he plans to appoint him as a board member in Sharon's place in a matter of weeks. He's been a little busy. Brent's background is as a senior level marketing and events professional whose marketing, event, and PR programs have obtained over $100 million in free media placement in print, TV, and movies, including Martha Stewart, Extreme Home Makeover, Little People, Big World, The Today Show, Better Homes and Gardens, Popular Mechanics, Confessions of a Shopaholic, just to name a few. Very diverse. During his tenure at the Dane County Regional Airport, he had been directly responsible for the development and execution of a 3-year, $1 million rebranding and several national award-winning marketing communication programs to stimulate passenger and airline traffic. And I'm sure they would welcome those ideas again right now while there's no traffic out there. So welcome. We look forward to having you as an active participant on our board. Then we have Skip Harless, who many of us know. He has 30 years in full service hotel business. He's been with the Hilton for the last 5 years and Marcus Hotels for 6 years, having first been at Grand Geneva 20 plus years with Hyatt Hotels and Resorts in other communities. He was born and raised in Texas, so we're kind of thrilled to have him now as a Badger Packer fan, I'm sure. So then we have Ariana. Okay, I'm going to try not to blow this here. Aureliano. How did I do on that? Montez. And you come from a big family, 11 kids. At 8 years old, you started helping in the family business. You moved to the States in 99 and started your life in the food service industry, working for a restaurant in Rockford, Illinois. Since then, you have, and now I've lost my second page. Oh dear. I got a lot of paper here, and I had it all laid out.
If you'd like me to continue a little bit.
I think we should continue so we can keep this moving.
Okay, so after Rockford, he ended up getting into the restaurant industry. Pretty much any position you can name in a restaurant, he's been in it. And now he managed for Fight Canteen.
So welcome to all of our totally awesome.
One more.
Oh, one more. Okay.
Eric Rotier. He's the regional vice president of operations for North Central Group. He's worked there for the past 15 years. He's worked with a lot of Madison area hotels. He's also had oversight for hotels in Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, Colorado, Arizona. He served as president for the Madison chapter of Wisconsin Hotel and Lodging Association, served on the board of Greater Madison Convention and Visitors Bureau, served on the board of Madison's Festivals, Inc., lots of boards. And he is a lifetime Madison resident, currently living on the east side. He has 5 kids, a wife and 5 kids. 3 of them are out of the house. That's it.
Okay, well, welcome to all of our new board members, and I'm sure it goes without saying, it'll be really fun to meet you in person. So with that, we'll move on now to the slate of officers to be presented by Jane Richardson, the committee chair.
You are unmuted, Jane.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. This is great. I want to report that the nominating committee, composed of myself, Alice O'Connor, and Sue Sabaki, met on March 12th, a while ago, to consider a slate of officers for the coming year. And let's see, the current officers are Alice O'Connor, chair, Judy Karofsky, vice chair, Jim Ring, secretary, and we invited them to continue, and we were very happy to report that they accepted our nomination. A couple other things so we like to put forward that slate. A couple other things I wanted to mention, however, is that Jim Ring is a state appointee, a governor's appointee to Monona Terrace. His term is up April 30th, but the governor probably has other things on his mind right now, and he has not yet made a decision as to whether he's going to reappoint Jim or someone else. But we're very happy to nominate him as secretary. Hope he can continue. So I wanted to just let you know about that, and that if it happens that the governor decides to appoint someone else, we will then meet again and propose an alternative secretary for the group. And another thing is that we talked about being interested in anticipation of next year's selection of officers, that we set up a protocol for notifying the board ahead of time about our intention to meet and discuss nominations, and encouraging board members who might be interested in serving in a officer position to please let us know in advance, and we'll let you know when that meeting is going to come up. So we want to make sure that we spread the net widely. That's it.
Perfect. So are there any questions for the nominating committee?
See no questions.
No questions? Okay, so I need a motion to approve the nominating committee's slate of officers. And
I'm going to unmute Glenn.
I would move to approve the slate of officers as presented.
can someone second?
I need a raise of hands.
Please click raise hand.
Oh, just raise hands. Okay.
Jane Richardson,
Mhm.
you second?
Yes.
Okay, then the officers are,
The slate is approved and we can move to, oh wait, we have to ask if there's anyone that has a problem with it.
You can say, I would like to record this vote as having passed unanimously. If there are any objections, please raise your hand.
okay, I'd like to record this vote as unanimous. If there's any objections, someone raise your hand
Virtually.
virtually, I guess. Okay, we're good. Okay, we shall move on. Thank you. Now, Monona Catering year-end
No,
report.
wait, we actually have to do the vote for the slate. We actually have to elect them now.
Okay, sorry. So I need a motion to elect the slate of officers. Raise your hand virtually. I guess we need a motion for the election of officers, right? Okay, we need.
All right, I see. Stephen, do you make a motion?
Move to approve the slate of officers.
We need a second.
And it looks like Glenn. Unmute. Go ahead.
I will second Steve's motion to approve the slate of officers.
Perfect.
Okay.
And now, yeah, go ahead.
Is there any further discussion? If not, we will have a recording of a unanimous vote in favor of electing the slate of officers.
Looks good.
Okay, vote recorded. Now we'll move to the Monona Catering year-end report. Hi, Wendy. You have the floor.
Hello, everyone, and welcome new board members. It's nice to see you all. I've missed you all very much. Just to catch you up on our annual report from 2019, Monona Catering experienced a softer year than 2018. The year-end total revenue was $6,970,474, which was pre-audit, which is 2.3% down from 2018 revenue of $7,140,453. The total services for 2019 were 428,112 guests. We donated approximately 5,731 pounds to the Healthy Food for All program, which is distributed to local shelters, organizations, and pantries throughout the city. We also diverted 42,000 pounds of pre-consumer composting from the waste stream. For Lake Vista Cafe in 2019, sales were strong, despite having almost 3 weeks of rain closures in the opening month of May. The concert series had great attendance, including 2 concerts that were inside due to rain. The season finished with $189,624.18 in sales, which was approximately 6.4% down from 2018. And I think that was due to the rain closures that we had at the beginning of the opening season. Lake Vista guest cards, Lake Vista Cafe guest comment card averages were very good to excellent, with overall staff service satisfaction rated at 98.43% and overall food satisfaction and value rated at 97.68%. This year, due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Lake Vista Cafe will have a delayed opening. We are projecting an opening date, hopefully of June 11th, and it will be a limited menu for carryout service at that time. 2020 projections. Revenue for 2020 is projected to be at about 50% down from our forecast. So the initial report says 26. I just updated the forecast today with most of June being canceled. We're now down to about 50% of our estimated forecast for the year. We expect business to come back slowly, and attendance numbers will mostly be down until we get to the phase 3 of Badger Bounce Back. The fall is still projecting as strong right now with the greatest number of events in October. Our 2019 marketing activities that we did were the Monona Terrace client appreciation events, client menu tastings, wedding menu showcases, the Destination Madison client cultivation events, Monona Terrace Sales Blitz, Monona Terrace Monona Catering Team Development Day, and the United Way Combined Campaign. In 2019, we also revamped our menus, our catering menus. So we included the information regarding our sustainability efforts and Monona Terrace's Gold LEED certification, as well as photos of our food items to enrich our offerings. Moving ahead into 2020, we are dedicated to our local food sourcing and post-consumer composting efforts, and we're still creating new standards to ensure the health and safety of our staff and guests, and our service procedures and food handling. Now, I'd like to just kind of give you guys an update of what has been happening for us since COVID-19 started back in late February, early March. Monona Catering furloughed the entire staff on March 20th, except for 7 directors that were retained to continue basic minimal operations. And then with the aid of a PPP loan, we were able to bring back our entire management staff on April 20th following the CDC, OSHA, and Public Health Department guidelines. Our management team is working towards safely bringing back the rest of our staff after the Safer at Home expires on May 26th. I think we're looking hopefully for a June 1st start date for our union staff. We continue to refine our health and safety protocol plan to distribute to clients to help them feel confident in our measures as meetings and events rebook at Monona Terrace. And then finally, my last portion of this report is our executive chef, Matt Reichard, will be stepping down in his position. Last year, Matt had celebrated his 30th anniversary with Kelber and Monona Catering combined. From his early days at Kelber Catering to the opening of the Monona Terrace, Matt's leadership and culinary skills have helped to create the strong and vibrant company of Monona Catering. Matt has been the cornerstone of our operation, and his hard work, sweat, and tears have propelled us to be award-winning achievements. Matt's contribution to be the best, no less, can be seen in our menus, food displays, plate presentations, and culinary staff. Matt's last day will be July 1st, and he'll be working with the culinary staff to transition them in his absence. That's about all I have now.
Any questions from anybody? And first of all, if we were there, we would all be clapping for Matt and thank him for his dedication and many years of service. And we wish him well in whatever's next for him.
Thank you.
So pass that on to him. We were all silently clapping.
I will.
Because of the mute buttons. So, any questions for Wendy?
It looks like Alder has. Go ahead.
Okay, Alderman Bevere.
Thank you, Sarah and Alice. I too want to say hi to everybody just at the outset here and welcome all of our new colleagues. Look forward to working with all of the new board members. And congratulations on your respective appointments. It's great to see everybody, albeit virtually. And I want to thank Wendy and Patty for joining us as they always dutifully do, representing Monona Catering. Your report was great. Wendy, I appreciate it. And obviously the written report was consistent with what you just articulated. I especially appreciated your summary of what the situation has been for catering since the pandemic. The one area that wasn't mentioned that I did have a question about, though, is your, I'm sure, extensive inventory of both fresh and frozen food. Could you articulate a little for us, Wendy, what you were able to do in disposing of that? Were you able to donate most all of the fresh food, and then particularly the frozen food? How were you able to deal with that and ensure that all those foodstuffs weren't wasted?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So yes, Monona Catering has a really great relationship with the Healthy Food for All Corporation, based out of the Feed Kitchen, the Madison Feed Kitchen. And they come over weekly and pick up all of our food that we are donating. So when we basically shut down on March 20th, they came over and got everything that they could, all of the produce, all of the food that was fresh. We did keep some frozen product in the freezers, but essentially from the bakery to the coolers to the fresh stuff, we were able to donate all of that to Healthy Food for All. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Healthy Food for All, but they take it back to the feed kitchen and then they sort it out and they let the different food sources like the different charities and things like that come and get what they want from them. So it didn't just go to the feed kitchen, it went dispersed throughout the city.
Fantastic. I have one question. When you said you were bringing staff back June 1st, is that going to be everybody, or are you bringing them back as business grows again?
We are bringing them back in a staggered process. So we're starting with union staff. We're starting with seniority first. And we have to do all new orientation training, health procedures. We have to issue them masks and gloves and all the rest of the PPE that we'll be using throughout the building. So it's going to be a staggered approach. We'll start with, the most seniority and then go to the next and the next and the next. And we'll see how this kind of combines as the business starts to grow back.
Is it your expectation when, the assumption that meetings will come back, however slow or whatever, that they will be wearing masks when they're serving?
At this point, yes. Yes. Just because that is the guideline where we're following through the health department, that masks should be worn at all times. Also, the social distancing will have to take place. We also have, for the folks in the kitchen that work very, very closely with each other, we have the plastic face shields that they will be wearing also. So.
Wow. Well, as usual, Wendy and Patty, just thank you, echoing what Alderman Verveer said. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. And I think being flexible and quick to make sure all that food wasn't lost and stuff like that. So that's a shout out to you.
Oh, Patty has her hand raised. I'm going to unmute her.
Okay, Patty. Wait,
Patty, are you getting a prompt to unmute yourself?
Patty, you have to unmute yourself.
There it is.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. It's great to see you remotely anyway. I just have to give Wendy some really high marks and kudos on how thorough she's been, how well things have been coordinated in these very challenging times, and the stress of dealing with staff. And she's done a really good job of putting together, a COVID-19 preparedness plan for Monona Catering. So. Uh, just a great job, and the operation is in excellent hands with her and the rest of the team. So just a vote of confidence publicly for me for everything that she's done. I think you would all be well satisfied and pleased with everything that's been done behind the scenes. So that's all I had.
Thank you. And not surprising. I think everyone on the board really appreciates your proactive thinking and all this stuff, Wendy, to get us ready for what's next and continued uncertain times. So,
Alice, it looks like Alder Revere has another question.
Okay, Alderman Revere.
Thanks again, Sarah and Alice. It occurred to me, since we are blessed with so many new board colleagues, it would probably be very helpful to them if Patty and Wendy could give a 1 or 2 minute explanation of what the relationship is between Monona Catering and Monona Terrace. They might not realize what this entity Kelber Catering is, and then even more specifically, Patty and Wendy, what your two respective roles are within the organization. So if you could do a quick little mini orientation.
Yeah, the key word being 1 minute.
Let Patty take it then.
Okay. Well, I'll do it as quick as I can. Kelber Catering, who operates at the Minneapolis Convention Center, has been in business since 1928. So we're headed towards 100 years, and we're really excited about that. But Monona Catering was developed and came into being when Monona Terrace, when bid was made, and we were successful back in 1996 to open Monona Terrace. So Monona Catering is a sister company to Kelber Catering, and between the two organizations, we have let's see, approximately 50 plus managers and directors between the two companies. Total employee roster is somewhere in the 500 to 600 employees, and we use one another as a resource. We have a lot of great minds in both locations, so that's the relationship, and we've been pretty successful with that. Wendy's the general manager, the on-site manager at Monona Terrace for Monona Catering. And then I am the CEO and oversee the operation in Minneapolis. And I guess technically oversee Monona Catering, but really Wendy runs the show there. So that's the real quick thumbnail version of what we do.
Well done. Wendy, do you want to add anything to that? That's a no. Okay. Thank you. Okay, now we need
Finance.
Yeah,
report.
Now the finance. And Glenn, you have the floor.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you. Thanks, Alice. And I'd also like to welcome the new board members. It's kind of aggravating not to be able to see everyone in person, but you do all have beautiful images. Just 2 items on the Finance Committee report. Some old business. The Finance Committee met in February and approved the 2021 base room rental prices and the guest price list, copies of which you all should have and had an opportunity to review. We have not had a board meeting since then, so I would like to entertain a motion to approve these price lists.
So we have a motion. Can I get a second?
I guess Alice should ask for the motion, but yeah. I will make the motion. I will make the motion.
Okay. Someone want to
And
second?
it looks like Judy will second. Judy? Okay.
Second. Any discussion?
It looks like Alder Revere.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks again, Sarah and Alice. As Glenn mentioned, since it has been many weeks since the Finance Committee voted to adopt these new rates, could I just have a quick confirmation from Connie and or Bill that the administration, the staff believes that these rates are appropriate given the recovery that we'll all be facing from the pandemic? Or in other words, is staff still comfortable recommending the various rates that the Finance Committee approved back in early February?
Does Connie or Bill want to raise their hand and let me know who to unmute? Okay, I'm going to unmute Connie.
Connie is the co-host and can unmute herself.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't raise them very much at all. We try to keep keep up with the competitors, but we don't want to be the leaders in the cost. So I feel comfortable that we've not raised them very much, and that it wouldn't be an issue.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Connie.
Go ahead, Alice.
Okay, so we just need a motion.
We just need the second. Or no, did we get the second? Judy did that. We just need
now we approve. We need a motion to, or if you approve, don't raise your hand. So
looks good.
Looks like it's consensus. That wasn't very polished. Okay. Then Glenn, do you want to make any other comments about the Finance Committee that we just had?
Yeah, just a few items because it's such an important issue right now under the COVID situation. The Finance Committee met an hour before this meeting. The members were Alice O'Connor, Jim Ring, Mike Revere, and Judy Karofsky. And we had a guest speaker, Dave Schmidtke, the city finance director, who put together a pretty good presentation for us. And we had some time to ask questions, particularly how Monona Terrace is going to be funded this year. And he went into a lot of economic issues, just global macro issues, as well as the city of Madison budget issues, issues such as the room tax. And as we all know, or most of us know, that Monona Terrace is funded by operations, a subsidy from the room tax, or from the city of Madison, and then the room tax allocation from city room tax fund. He did mention that probably the thing that was weighing on our minds mostly, he went through the workings of the Monona Terrace Reserve Fund, which has been somewhat mysterious, and the calculation has changed several times over the past decade. But we have that on the plate to work with. We do have some issues with the room tax, as we all know. Travel and tourism is down, and of course, business is down during this early part of the year. So he's forecasting a 50% reduction. It's a nice round numbers in the room tax, which would be funding for 2021, i.e. for the next year's budget. So Connie and staff are working on the budget, incorporating estimates, and it's going to be a long, painstaking process. The city, he mentioned the city has received some CARES Act funding, will be FEMA funding. Some things will not be funded, but there's a lot of budget balancing to do at the city. So it's going to be very challenging for Dave and the mayor and her staff as well. So I am going to ask if there's any other Finance Committee members, if there's anything that stood out or think would be interesting for the board to hear.
Glenn,
Yes.
I took notes. I thought one of the things Dave said that under the different calculations they had made regarding the estimated drop in business, et cetera, a best case scenario would be that Monona Terrace would break even on the room tax by 2025. So I think my takeaway from that was that overnight success takes time, as Mark Twain once said, and that this will be a slow, methodical path back to the success we were enjoying before.
That was, I recall that, and I did make a note to that was a projection.
Yes.
When we would hit the 2019 levels. So that is 6 years. And it makes you wonder if the whole industry is going to take that long in tourism or conventions and things of that nature to get back to the 2019 levels. So these are big issues for us as a board and of course staff in the city of Madison.
It looks like Judy Cross the comment.
Especially because there are new members, and to remind all of us when we say room tax, and yes, there is a 3 plus $3.5678 million donation contribution to Monona Terrace annually. That room tax is shared, and I think somebody on the committee, maybe Mike, Alderman Vivier, or Glenn, could maybe briefly describe how that pie chart is divided up among other entities in the city, please.
Do you want me to start, Mike? Since I'm unmuted, I'll let Mike. Under the current state law, the city room tax generated by room nights that everyone pays staying in the hotels goes into a fund that is estimated at the end of the year, and a commission has been appointed by the mayor to allocate those funds at its discretion. 30% of it, however, can be used by the municipality. So the city of Madison presumably would use 30% of the actual annual room tax fund. The remaining 70% then is allocated based on proposals by interested parties, which would include Monona Terrace. For example, it's a big part. It's always been a big part of our budget, our operating budget, as well as debt service and capital budget. But there's a panel. I think it's six of us are on the commission. Mike and I are on that at the moment. And this past year, roughly about 40% of the fund last year went to Monona Terrace and 40% went to Destination Madison, which fit the criteria that the statutes require for allocating these types of funds. The Overture Center was the other major recipient at 15%, and the Dane County Zoo and Obrecht Gardens received some funding as well. There's some other smaller amounts, but those are essentially up for grabs every year. So technically you could argue that we start at zero, but we do have to protect, as a board here, protect, the operational funding of Monona Terrace, certainly. So Mike's been in the heat of those battles and discussions for inception as well. So I hope you have some color.
Well, thank you, Glenn. You did a great job summarizing the work of the Room Tax Commission and responding to Judy's question. Glenn and I have served on the Room Tax Commission ever since it was created by virtue of state statute several years ago. The only other thing I guess I would add is that for those that weren't in the Finance Committee meeting, which I know all of you technically were invited to join in if you were interested, but for those of you that weren't at the 4 o'clock meeting, Dave Schmidtke did did share with us something that Glenn and I already knew, and that is that the Room Tax Commission is holding a special meeting the Friday after Memorial Day, so Friday, May 29th. And that meeting, I'm sure, will be available on the various Madison City Channel platforms if you'd like to tune into that virtual meeting. So the Room Tax Commission has a tremendous burden ahead of us in figuring out what to do, given the dramatic drop in projected room tax collections. You know, we are responsible for, again, this approximately $20 million annual budget, so the work we do this year and on next year in terms of how to wade through the dramatic downturn in the hospitality sector is a tremendous challenge. So I just wanted to mention when the commission is meeting next week, Friday, May 29th. I believe that meeting's at 4 o'clock, if I remember correctly. The other note I'll mention here is Dave Schmidtke did share an extensive presentation to us, a PowerPoint presentation to us at our earlier meeting this afternoon. And I believe, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but that presentation was only emailed to the handful of us that serve on the Monona Terrace Finance Committee. So if you could forward
Finance Committee
that you sent to the Finance Committee this morning to the whole full board, I think that would be very helpful in further answering Judy's good question, because there is some I think really helpful information there. I think the last thing I just want to say, although I could save it for when we get to Jeff's finance report and Connie's director's report, but I do want to say that the major news, in my estimation, out of Dave's presentation to our finance committee is the wonderful news that our own Monona Terrace Reserve Fund is significantly more healthy than we were led to believe. And again, I don't remember all of the various emails, and I think Connie did send but again, I can't remember if the new board members were included in these various emails or not. But during the course of the pandemic, Connie, you've done an awesome job keeping the board updated and informed. I can't even imagine what it's like becoming our new director in the midst of a pandemic. And by the way, congratulations on that appointment and confirmation to you, Connie. But anyway, Connie, I think, did explain to at least some of us on the board through electronic communications and also her calls to most all of us that there was a huge kind of discrepancy in what internally Monona Terrace staff felt the balance of our Monona Terrace Reserve Fund was versus what the city finance department staff felt it was. And through a lot of give and take and research and recalculation, that reserve fund is almost doubled, not quite doubled, but from kind of the initial projection from the city finance staff, the health of the Monona Terrace Reserve Fund has significantly increased from what they originally articulated. And Dave, by the way, shared that news with the city finance committee, the city council's finance committee that the mayor chairs in the meeting we had a couple of nights ago, Tuesday evening. So I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the hard work that Connie and Jeff and the rest of the team at Monona Terrace did, and kind of insisting that we felt that our reserve fund did actually have more money in it than the finance staff at the city originally had argued. So I think that's obviously helpful to our massive need to recover out of this pandemic.
Okay.
It looks like Jim Ring has a comment or question. I'm going to
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of points on the room tax. It looks like you all received your presentation.
Jim, you're breaking up a little bit. Can you get closer to your mic?
All right, is this better?
Yes.
Okay. You all just received the presentation, the pie chart. I wanted to point out, you got to look at the 2 pages, the 2 pie charts. The city is actually, the breakdown is only up to 70%. So I have to just point out the city actually takes the highest percentage of the gross room tax at 30%. And Monona Terrace and Destination National 27% go down there. So I mean, when we read that at 39%, that's only up to 70% that's left, general fund. And then I was just looking at the budget, the city's budget in regards to the room tax, and there's only a surplus of 118,000 2019 budget. So just looking forward, there are no reserves at the room tax commission level built in there to absorb any. So everyone is going to have to absorb their own losses in some way. There's nothing at the tax kind of a parent level of the fund amount in a reserve.
Yes. Any other hands? I don't see any. Okay. So we don't need a motion for the Finance Committee report. Thanks, Glenn. Now we're going to move on to item number 6, reports required by the Monona Terrace Agreement. You should have had them in your packets. Do you have any questions for staff? If there are no questions, I'll take a motion to accept these reports.
Users. Jane, your motion.
I so move.
Need a second? Judy?
Judy?
Okay.
Second.
If there's any objection to reporting a unanimous vote in favor of accepting these reports, keep your hands down. So the vote is recorded unanimous. Great. Now we'll move on to item number 7, the booking pace. Bill, you have the floor, and a short report can be okay.
All right, I know how to do that. Thank you. Where shall I start? I'll give you an overview of what 2020's looking like versus our budget. And Jeff Boyd has the financial details, so I'm going to talk in event numbers, and he will color in the financial ramifications of these things. So we budgeted in 2020 to have 172 banquets. And as we sit here today, I'd put us at about 116, but that presumes we're going to do events in June and July, and realistically, we're not optimistic that's going to happen. We budgeted 168 meetings to occur over the course of 2020. Right now, I'd put us at 98. We budgeted 25 conferences, and I'd put us right now at 13. We have 13 on the books still. And we budgeted 30 conventions, and right now we have 12 remaining of those 30. And as you might remember, back before all this hit, we were set up for a really nice year. Our numbers were shaping up. We had contracts for the budgeted conventions. We had contracts for the budgeted conferences. Banquets were trending ahead of our budget pace. Meetings were a little bit down, but there was time to make that up. So what was shaping up to be a really nice year, fell apart, as we all know. I did look ahead to 2021, and some of this has to do with events we moved from 2020 into 2021. We rolled their deposit forward. We tried as best we could to retain all the business that we could and roll that business forward into 2021. And I think we're seeing some of those benefits. We haven't set our budget yet in terms of the number of events for 21, but right now we have 27 signed contracts for conventions. We have 3 pending. The contract is out. We're expecting it to be signed. So that would put us at 30 conventions, which was our budget for 2020. We also have 4 tentative conventions holding space. We're talking to them. We hope to convert. And some of these Destination Madison is of course, working with as well on our behalf. Conferences, right now we have 12 signed contracts. We have 4 pending that we expect to get back. That would put us at 16. And we have 3 conferences tentatively holding space. That would put us at 19. And so we're working with 19 conferences for 2021. And I'd point back to 2020, our budget was 25. So, and the pace on banquets and on meetings, if things hold together, 2021, is shaping up so far to be, potentially a year like we were hoping to have in 2020. And those are the numbers I'm seeing now. These are going to bob up and down depending on how the pandemic evolves. And we're constantly adjusting our models. We're constantly adjusting our numbers based on new information. And so this is a snapshot in time. And as you know all too well, could certainly change. A couple other numbers I wanted to hit on that questions the board may have. How much business was lost? Jeff will fill in the dollar amount, but we're tracking about 194 events that we lost so far for 2020. How many events rebooked? We had 63 events rebooked. We rolled them into 2020 or 2021. I'm sorry, into 2021 or 2022. And then, in terms of new business, we're still putting business on the books. We booked about 50, new business for this year and for next. We still get wedding inquiries. People are still booking and planning for the future. So we probably get, two, perhaps 3 wedding inquiries per week. And we're working, to convert those as best we can. I think that's where I'll leave my report. And Jeff, as I mentioned, Jeff Boyd has the financial aspects of this.
Okay, and either Jeff or Bill, I'd be curious said another way, 63 rebooked, but the ones that had deposits down, they got their deposits back, and so if they were to come back, that would be a whole new contract? Was there any promise of, those
are the rebook.
That would be a rebook?
Yeah, we counted those as a rebook. We didn't, if we rolled it forward, we didn't count it as new business.
Okay.
And we try to be as flexible as possible, of course, because we're trying to take the long view on this, and keeping people's deposits. We don't win by keeping a deposit. That makes people pretty frustrated.
Well, everybody's heard it right now, so I think that's true. So, okay, thank you, Jeff.
I'm going to go ahead and mute Bill.
Yeah, Jeff, we're done with Bill. We don't need any sort of a motion or anything. So, Jeff, a finance report, you have the floor.
Thank you. For those new members, my name is Jeff Boyd. I'm the business manager here at Monona Terrace. I've been with Monona Terrace for about a little over 20 years now, and a majority of that working in the finance office. Like Bill said, the first quarter of the year, at least up until March 20th, was looking pretty good. We had the number of events were really close to being on par with what we had budgeted, but the spending was going well. We were about $88,000 to the good through the first 3 months with regard to revenue, and even with expenses hurting us a little bit, especially with some retirements that we had and a lot of sick leave and benefit payouts for those retirees. We were still at about $53,000 ahead of plan through March. And then March 20th came and things went bad. For the first time that I can remember, our miscellaneous revenue was higher than any event revenue that we had in April. And that was just because of some miscellaneous revenue that was processed. So right now we're operating, we're down about $97,000 through March now. Through April. I'm sorry, through April. Like Bill said, there's been 194 events canceled for this year alone due to the COVID-19 reason, and that number is an estimated $1.9 million in lost revenue. We've also processed 71 refunds to customers, and the refunds that we've sent back to people is just shy of $210,000. That's pretty much it as far as what's happened so far. I think that Connie was going to have a discussion with regards to where we go from here through the rest of the year. Thank you.
Okay. Well, as we all know, it's just tough times, but we will soldier on here. Now we are at our brand new director's report. In your official new capacity as her director, where we still haven't had a meeting with you in person. So Connie, take it away.
Ready to go, Connie.
First, I want to welcome all of the new board members. I've spoken with you all on the phone and some via Zoom, but welcome. Hopefully soon we can have a in-person meeting at some point. Sarah, can you pull up the budgeted reductions and projection deficit document, please? So this was the document that the finance committee was referring to, or I guess Mr. Verveer, Mike Verveer was referring to. So what we've done several projections. First, we did like a best case, worst case, and catastrophic case scenario. And then we've settled on just updating. It was sort of the middle case to worst case scenario. So for permanent salaries, if you look at the column with the plus and minus, we've been able to reduce permanent salaries by $620,662. We've reduced hourly wages by $554,339. Overtime is reduced by $23,302. A lot of that has to do with holiday pay, which falls in that category. But we've been over in benefits, as Jeff mentioned. We've had 4 retirements, and their sick time payouts have amounted to the $96,630. The total amount, I believe, was $160,000. So for total payroll savings, it was actually $1,198,000, but with the $96,000 deficit, it's $1,101,674. And then for operating expenses, we've since February we have been very frugal in our spending, and we're able to save $281,000 in purchase supplies, and another $278,868 in services, and then the total operating expense savings is $560,525. Added to the payroll expense saving, we have a total budget savings of $1,662,198. Jeff and Bill kind of talked about the revenue, but we are down. Our lost event and miscellaneous revenue is $2,196,622. Our TOT loss would be, we were projecting 50%, so it'd be $2,147,508 for a total lost revenue of $4,344,000. And then minus what we had the total deficit is $1,681,932. I think Lynn said, and Jim also said, we do have 1.9 reserve budget that is going to have to be used to probably plug some of that hole. That would still leave us short about $782,000. But we also have the $983,000 capital budget, and we had talked to Dave Key about the possibility of moving some of that to operating. And he said that would have to go through the Room Tax Commission, that request. So that's my report. If anyone has any questions, please ask away.
Connie, will when the room tax meets, then will some of the capital budget numbers, will that request be made to move to the operations budget to give you a little bit more flexibility?
Yeah, I think we would have to make that request, my understanding.
Do you plan to, though?
I think we just lost her.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we just lost Connie. Is she on the phone?
Oh, I see her again down here.
And Judy Karofsky also has raised her hand.
Well, let's see what Judy has to say, maybe?
Yeah, let's go with Judy until Connie comes back on, and hopefully we get Connie back.
Go ahead, Judy.
I just wanted someone to repeat what she said at the end. What goes to the room tax commission? I missed that. I couldn't hear what she said.
Are you back on, Connie? Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. We would have to make that request to the tax commission to move the money.
Can you repeat that, Connie? It broke up again.
Okay. We would have to ask to have some of the reserved capital budget money moved to the operating. Into operating.
Okay, Judy, you're good? Judy has a question. Judy, you're muted.
Go ahead, Judy.
Go ahead.
This is what we've been discussing all afternoon, and I'm losing track of the transfer of funds. How and why does that go to the room tax commission? I guess that's my question. How does the request for the transfer of funds, why does the request for the transfer of funds go through the room tax commission?
Connie?
Oh, Glenn?
There she goes.
Mute for some reason.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, okay. I don't know exactly how we have to do it. That Dave just told us that this week that if that was something that our board felt was something that we wanted to do, we would have to make that ask.
But my question is, are you going to make the ask?
Oh. Well, I think it's definitely on the table. I think we have a couple weeks yet before we have to decide, right? Or a week maybe.
Okay. I mean, obviously we're all interested in Monona Terrace hanging on to as much cash as you can.
It looks like Glenn has a comment. Go ahead,
Yes.
Glenn.
Thank you. Connie, I didn't quite understand that. Did you say you had roughly $900,000 of capital expenditures you wanted to put in the operating budget?
So the fund that Dave was talking about is $983,000. Capital money we haven't spent.
Connie, your feedback is really
okay.
off.
I think I understand what she said. Apparently, there was some unused capital expenditure money in the room tax fund, and Connie had requested of Dave Schmidtke at the city whether if she could use that to offset some of our operating expenses this year. Is that correct, Connie?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions for Connie?
Looks like Skip does. Go ahead. Skip.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure I understand. The reserves applied line, the 321,000, is that the revised number that you learned from Dave Schmidtke, or?
Well, that was budgeted when we did our operating budget last year.
Okay.
So 321,000 of reserves.
But you learned that was actually more like double that. Is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Well, we have a reserve fund, and some years we don't have business in place, and so we'll budget to pull some money out of that reserve fund. And the reserve fund balance has been kind of like Glenn was describing it earlier, sort of an elusive number. And so we've had probably 5 meetings, Bill and I and Jeff, with Dave Schmidtke, and trying to get to the bottom of why what they told us last year was that we had 1.2 million, and why that was now suddenly, less than 500,000. So we finally figured out through these conversations that they weren't giving us, they weren't, I guess, using or giving us the capital. So they were moving capital money to our operating budget, on the expense side, but not giving us the operating budget money on the allocation side. So it was under showing we had getting 3 of us or 4 of us together, we finally figured it out, and we have 1.9 million instead of the 485,000 in the reserves.
Is that clear, Skip?
Probably not.
Sort of, because that was the 400 and something I didn't understand how you get the 490 as opposed to the 321. So 321 was budgeted, but you really have 490, but then you really actually have 1 point something, 1.9.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Out of that 1.9 million, we asked to use 321,000 this year.
I see. Okay.
But
thank you.
But when we were having a discussion about how big the fund was, they kept telling us it was only like 485,000 when it's really 1.9 million.
Skip, we have had many conversations about because it was so confusing.
No, I think I do understand now, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
It looks like Eric Rotier has a question. I'm going to unmute him. Great. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. I had a question on the numbers for the May 13th projection. We'd heard earlier that there are still a lot of, or some groups on the books in June, July that might not happen, and that October is looking pretty stout. Are these numbers based on those all happening, or is this a more conservative projection?
Good question.
We have to get Jeff to answer that. He did the projection.
I just unmuted you, Jeff.
Thank you. So when Bill and I were working on the projections, and then also in some of the communication we've had with Dave Schmidtke, he was basing a lot of his information on events coming back to the building for August. So we took that same approach. Even though there are events on the presently in our event management software, we decided that we won't use that revenue. We'll use August through December, and then if we are able to have those events, that will just help our bottom line.
It's
Great.
still
Thank you.
Uncertain times. Okay, any other questions for Sarah? Oh, wait.
I just wanted to make sure Eric was good.
Yeah.
Okay, I think he was.
Do you see any other hands, Sarah?
I do not.
I don't see anybody. Okay, well, for our first and hopefully last Zoom meeting, a welcome to our new board members, and it's a little bit after 6 o'clock. I can entertain a motion that we adjourn. And
go ahead, Alder Revere.
Actually, before we adjourn, I was wondering, Connie, did you say that was the extent of your director's report? As you know, on the agenda, we list a myriad of items every meeting. Was that your entire report presenting the budget forecast?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Because my screen is like swirling around. I think it's tired. Yeah, if you had any questions about what we sent you on the board report, I'm happy to answer more questions, but I really wanted to just cover the budget reductions that we'd made, and then also sort of the forecast for revenue.
If I could then, Alice, just ask Connie one question not related per se to the budget and our finances. And that is in the written report to the board, it doesn't specifically address whether or not we've made the decision yet to cancel the Concert on the Rooftop series this summer. Have Misty and the community relations team made that decision yet? Have we thrown in the towel for the whole year, or is that still to be determined?
I think that Bill might know a little bit more, but the first set of concerts that we do are going to be canceled. They just haven't announcement yet. Dane Dances is still, my understanding is they're still on the fence and haven't made a decision yet. And then we're not going to make a decision on the later ones, I believe, until we have a better picture of what it's going to look like.
Have Bill on the line.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Our concert series we did cancel. Too much uncertainty, and you know to assure the hygiene of the guests and our staff and the performers. Dane Dances hasn't made a decision, so those are the Fridays in August. There's a chance, you know, depending on what the conditions are, we could do perhaps a limited concert series in September. That's something we're thinking about. If Dane Dances would want to slide into September, we'd certainly have that conversation with them and, you know, give them priority over our internal concert series. The artists that we had contracted were all very gracious, and we were able to roll many of those concerts forward to dates we'll get figured out next summer.
Thank you. I appreciate that update. And you anticipated my follow-up question, which was Dane Dances, because I hadn't heard anything from them as to what their thoughts are this year. So we do have some flexibility both for them and perhaps community relations team could put together one concert maybe in September, but otherwise the entire series has been canceled.
Mike, any other questions?
Is all that right?
Yes, you have that right.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Alice. If there are no other questions.
Okay, then I'm going to have Sarah take your hand down.
Done.
Okay. Now we can entertain a motion for adjournment. Look forward to meeting everybody in person at our next board meeting. Is there a motion?
Judy?
I'll make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, Judy. I need a second.
Glenn?
Thank you, Glenn.
I'm trying to unmute you, Glenn. I can't seem to do it. There you go.
I second the motion to adjourn.
Okay. Well, all in favor, a unanimous vote to adjourn unless you raise your hands. So meeting adjourned, and everybody stay safe and stay optimistic. We are going to get through this, and we're all going to be out there spending money and booking meetings again. So, and eating a lot of food and drinking a lot of wine, and it's all going to be good.
I think Jane has something to say. Jane, did you have something to say?
I was just waving goodbye. Waving goodbye.
Sorry.
Hi. I went through the training. I know about raising my hand.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody. The meeting is adjourned.